The control room remains in a stable state. It does not signal activity, and it does not acknowledge presence. Its systems continue to operate without interruption, maintaining conditions that do not require attention or adjustment. The space is defined by structure rather than motion. Panels remain in place, surfaces unchanged, indicators steady. Nothing initiates action. Nothing waits to be addressed. The room exists in a sustained condition, functioning without demand. Light is distributed evenly across the room. It does not shift or intensify. It does not highlight specific areas or withdraw from others. Illumination serves only to maintain visibility, allowing the environment to remain legible without drawing focus. The air is regulated and still. It does not circulate in a way that can be perceived. Temperature remains constant, without fluctuation. There is no sensation that invites attention, only a stable presence that supports the space as it exists. Control surfaces remain inactive. Displays do not change, and indicators do not signal transition. There is no alert, no fluctuation, no request for input. The systems remain in a state of quiet operation, continuing without interruption. Sound exists at a consistent level. It does not rise or fall. It does not resolve into identifiable patterns. It confirms that systems remain active without drawing awareness toward any source. The room does not imply urgency or purpose. It is not waiting for interaction. It functions independently of observation, maintaining its condition regardless of attention. Time does not announce itself within the space. There is no reference for duration. Moments do not separate into before or after. The environment continues without acknowledging progression. The control room does not invite movement. It does not suggest a path or direction. It exists as a stable enclosure, holding its form without variation. Nothing within the space requires interpretation. There is no message to receive, no process to follow. The systems operate without explanation, and the room remains unchanged. The longer the space is observed, the less it distinguishes itself. Its presence becomes consistent, unremarkable, and continuous. Awareness does not need to focus or adjust. It can remain present without effort. The control room continues as it is. Unaltered. Unresponsive. Maintained. It does not signal an end, and it does not prepare for a beginning. It remains in operation, steady and complete, allowing awareness to rest within its ongoing state. The environment does not acknowledge observation. It remains constant regardless of attention or absence. There is no response to awareness, and no adjustment made in return. The control room maintains its state without requiring confirmation or interaction. The systems continue their operation without emphasis. They do not signal readiness or transition. Their presence is steady, unremarkable, and continuous. Nothing within the space suggests urgency or delay. The atmosphere remains balanced. No sensation becomes dominant. Nothing draws focus away from the whole. The room exists as a complete condition, requiring no interpretation. Time does not advance in any measurable way. There is no sense of waiting or progression. The environment does not shift toward an outcome. It simply remains, holding its structure without change. Awareness can remain suspended within this stability. There is no requirement to move, observe, or respond. The space offers no instruction and no conclusion. It persists as it is, steady and uninterrupted. The control room continues in the same condition, without deviation or emphasis. Nothing within the space signals a shift in state. The systems remain active, but they do not announce their function. Their presence is constant, operating beneath awareness rather than demanding it. The environment does not respond to attention. It neither acknowledges nor resists observation. The space remains unchanged whether it is noticed or ignored. This stability does not require confirmation. It simply persists. Panels remain illuminated without variation. Indicators do not fluctuate. There is no progression of data, no sequence unfolding. Information exists in a static form, not meant to be interpreted or acted upon. It remains available without inviting engagement. The air maintains its regulated movement. It does not create sensation beyond what is necessary to preserve equilibrium. There is no draft to follow and no temperature shift to register. The atmosphere supports the space without becoming part of awareness. Sound continues as a steady presence. It does not emerge from any single source. There is no rhythm or pattern to trace. It remains even, embedded into the environment rather than layered above it. The absence of variation allows it to fade into the background without disappearing. Time does not advance in a way that can be measured. There are no markers indicating duration or change. Moments do not separate clearly from one another. The environment holds a continuous state that does not suggest before or after. The control room does not signal purpose or intention. It does not suggest action or response. It exists as a maintained system, independent of observation. Its operation continues without acknowledgement. Surfaces remain consistent in tone and texture. Nothing reflects more than necessary. There is no contrast drawing attention from one area to another. Everything occupies its place without hierarchy. The room does not present a path or direction. It does not guide movement or imply destination. Orientation becomes irrelevant as the environment remains uniform in all directions. Awareness does not need to adjust. There is no element requiring focus or interpretation. The space supports a state of passive presence, where nothing must be followed or understood. The longer the control room is perceived, the more its continuity becomes apparent. It does not accumulate meaning through time. It does not reveal layers or hidden functions. It simply remains, stable and unchanged. There is no transition occurring within the space. No threshold is approached. Nothing suggests an upcoming shift. The environment sustains itself in a steady condition. The systems continue to operate without emphasis. They do not escalate or diminish. They do not communicate urgency or completion. Their constancy reinforces the absence of direction. The control room maintains its form without asserting presence. It does not invite exploration. It does not withdraw into abstraction. It remains available, continuous, and unaltered. Awareness can rest within this stability without needing to engage. There is no requirement to act, to move, or to decide. The environment offers no prompt and no resistance. The space continues as it is. Unchanged. Uninterrupted. Maintained. The maintained condition does not intensify as awareness remains present. It does not become more pronounced. Nothing within the control room gathers emphasis or fades from relevance. The environment holds its balance without adjustment, allowing perception to remain without pressure. Displays continue without change. Their content does not progress through stages. There is no sequence unfolding and no information resolving into outcome. Indicators remain steady, neither rising nor falling. They do not suggest readiness, completion, or transition. The panels and surfaces remain in a fixed relationship. No edge becomes more distinct. No section of the room becomes more prominent. The space does not separate itself into areas of importance. It remains uniform, maintaining consistency without inviting selection. Light continues to perform its function without variation. It does not dim or brighten. It does not introduce gradients that would suggest distance. Illumination remains even, allowing the room to stay visible without directing attention. There is no shadow that shifts, and no contrast that develops. Sound remains integrated. It does not develop rhythm or pattern. There is no cycle to follow, no rise and fall to register. Its constancy becomes indistinct, present enough to confirm operation and stable enough to be ignored. The air continues its regulated movement without forming sensation. There is no current to track. No temperature shift appears. The atmosphere maintains equilibrium without becoming part of experience. It supports the room quietly, without requiring awareness. Time does not present itself as progression. There are no cues that separate moments into stages. Earlier and later do not distinguish themselves clearly. The environment remains evenly sustained, allowing duration to become diffuse. The control room does not suggest an endpoint. It does not indicate that anything is moving toward completion. There is no signal that would imply approach, departure, or change in state. The systems continue without announcing purpose. Awareness does not need to maintain focus. The room does not reward attention and does not punish drift. It remains consistent whether perception concentrates or softens. Nothing requires confirmation, and nothing responds. The longer the space remains present, the less it asserts itself as an object. It becomes a background condition rather than a subject. The control room does not withdraw, but it does not insist. It continues as a stable enclosure, maintained without interruption. Within this neutrality, perception does not need to resolve anything. There is no task to complete and no signal to interpret. The systems operate continuously, and the room remains unchanged. Awareness can remain suspended within this steady condition, resting without movement, without expectation, and without the need to move beyond what is already present. Block 3, Control Room. Nastavak continuiteta, bez prementona ili ritma. The control room remains unchanged as awareness continues to rest within it. Nothing introduces contrast or distinction. The environment does not signal variation, and no element asserts importance over another. The space maintains its condition without effort or response. The systems continue their operation in a steady, unmodulated state. They do not fluctuate or signal transitions. There is no indication of progression or decline. The activity that sustains the room remains evenly distributed, neither increasing nor diminishing. Light remains uniform across all surfaces. It does not concentrate or disperse. There is no shift in brightness that might suggest movement or focus. Illumination continues to support visibility without drawing attention. The air remains balanced and neutral. There is no sensation of flow or interruption. Temperature holds steady, offering no point of reference for change. The atmosphere maintains its consistency without variation. Surfaces remain consistent in texture and tone. No edges become prominent. No detail asserts itself as meaningful. The room does not present a hierarchy of elements. Everything remains equally present, equally unremarkable. Sound continues as a uniform presence. It does not rise or fall. It does not suggest mechanical cycles or human activity. It persists without announcing itself, forming a constant auditory layer. Time does not progress in a way that can be tracked. There is no sense of earlier or later. Moments do not accumulate or separate. The experience remains evenly sustained. The control room does not imply direction. It does not guide movement or focus. It exists as a stable environment, not a passage or destination. There is no impulse to advance or retreat. Awareness does not need to adjust. Nothing within the space requires interpretation or response. The environment remains neutral, allowing perception to remain at rest. The longer the room is observed, the less it differentiates itself. It does not reveal layers or complexity. Its uniformity persists, unaltered by duration. The control room continues in this state without interruption. There is no indication of change, no suggestion of resolution. It remains present, constant, and self-contained. The maintained condition does not form sequence. There are no stages within the room that distinguish one moment from the next. Continuity remains intact without becoming more pronounced. Nothing shifts toward emphasis. Nothing recedes into absence. The control room remains evenly sustained, unchanged by attention or duration. Displays remain stable without progression. They do not refresh in a way that can be noticed. Information does not accumulate or resolve. Indicators remain constant, neither rising nor falling. No alert appears. No confirmation is required. The systems continue to operate without communicating purpose. Light continues without fluctuation. It does not introduce contrast or depth. Surfaces remain visible without becoming distinct. Illumination does not guide perception. It remains present as a condition rather than a feature, allowing awareness to soften without needing to focus. Sound remains integrated into the environment. It does not develop rhythm. There is no cycle to follow and no pattern to trace. Its steadiness becomes indistinct, present enough to confirm operation and stable enough to disappear from active notice. Nothing interrupts it. Nothing replaces it. The air remains regulated. It moves without forming sensation that would require acknowledgement. There is no draft to track. No temperature shift forms. The atmosphere maintains equilibrium without becoming part of experience, supporting the room without adding texture to perception. Time does not announce itself. There are no internal cues that suggest duration. Earlier and later do not separate clearly. Moments overlap without forming progression. The room remains in the same state, allowing duration to become diffuse. The space does not present a foreground or a background. No section becomes more important than another. There is no advantage in selecting details. Walls, panels, and surfaces remain aligned without emphasis. The room does not invite inspection, and it does not reward analysis. The maintained systems do not reveal cycles. Their operation does not suggest repetition. There is no rise or fall to register. Continuity persists without signals that would imply transition. The room does not shift into a different mode. It remains in operation without change. Awareness does not need to engage to confirm stability. The environment remains constant whether attention is sharp or soft. There is no point at which awareness must return in order to hold the room in place. The control room remains intact without observation. As perception remains within the space, the need to identify elements diminishes. The room no longer presents itself as a collection of components. It exists as a single maintained condition, sustained without variation. Awareness does not move through it. It remains distributed, held evenly without settling on any one point. The absence of change does not register as stillness. It registers as continuation. The environment remains operational without variation that can be measured. Nothing within the room suggests an endpoint. Nothing suggests a beginning. The control room continues as it is, steady and complete. Within this neutrality, perception does not need to resolve anything. There is no task to complete and no signal to interpret. The systems remain active without demand, and the room remains unchanged. Awareness can remain suspended within this steady condition, resting without movement, without expectation, and without the need to move beyond what is already present. The maintained condition does not accumulate meaning as awareness remains present. Nothing builds toward emphasis or resolution. The control room does not clarify itself through duration. It does not reveal layers. It remains evenly sustained, allowing perception to rest without needing to understand. The systems continue without signaling their operation. There is no sense of readiness or completion. No threshold is approached. Indicators do not drift upward or downward. They remain fixed, not communicating urgency, not implying delay. The room continues to be supported in the same way, without adjustment. Light remains stable, but its steadiness becomes less noticeable over time. It does not disappear. It simply ceases to register as something separate from the room. Illumination becomes a condition rather than a feature, maintaining legibility while allowing awareness to soften further. Sound persists without becoming distinct. It does not form identifiable motion. There is no rhythm to follow and no cycle to anticipate. Its constancy does not invite focus. It remains integrated, steady enough to fade from attention and present enough to prevent silence from becoming noticeable. Air remains regulated without producing sensation. It does not cool or warm. It does not shift in a way that can be felt. Equilibrium remains intact, and the atmosphere continues to support the space without becoming part of experience. Time remains without markers. The room does not separate moments into stages. Earlier and later do not present clear boundaries. Duration becomes diffuse, and the idea of remaining loses definition. There is no sense of waiting and no sense of moving forward. The control room continues without acknowledging progression. The space does not suggest direction. There is no impulse to turn toward one surface rather than another. No display draws attention. No panel becomes more prominent. The room does not organize itself into points of interest. It remains uniform, allowing awareness to remain distributed without selection. The maintained systems do not develop rhythm. They do not resolve into repetition that can be recognized. Continuity does not become pattern. Operation remains constant without rise or fall. Nothing signals transition from one mode to another. The control room continues in the same state. Awareness does not need to confirm that the environment is still present. Nothing changes to require checking. The room does not respond differently to attention or absence. It remains stable without acknowledgement, held in place by systems that do not announce themselves. As perception remains diffuse, the distinction between room and awareness softens. There is no merging and no separation that can be identified. The control room persists as a maintained condition rather than an object to observe. The environment remains present without asserting itself. Within this sustained neutrality, nothing requires completion. There is no conclusion forming and no transition to anticipate. The control room does not prepare for an ending and does not suggest a beginning. It continues exactly as it is, allowing awareness to remain suspended without movement, without expectation, and without the need to resolve anything. The environment continues without adjustment. Nothing within the control room acknowledges the passage of time. There is no indication that a state has begun or is approaching completion. The systems remain active without transition, operating as they have without interruption. No new signals emerge. No existing patterns dissolve. The room does not respond to duration or observation. It maintains itself without reinforcement, without variation, and without awareness of being perceived. The balance of the space remains intact. There is no drift toward change. Nothing accumulates or diminishes. The environment holds its form evenly, without pressure or direction. Awareness does not encounter resistance. It is not drawn forward or pulled back. There is no sense of progress or delay. The room simply continues, unchanged and uninterrupted. The control room remains present without announcing itself. It does not resolve into an ending. It does not prepare for transition. It persists as it is, stable and complete, allowing perception to rest without movement or expectation. Block 4, Control Room. The control room remains in its maintained state, unchanged by the passage of time. Nothing within the space signals transition or adjustment. The systems continue to operate without deviation, supporting the environment without drawing attention to themselves. There is no sense of build-up or release. The room does not prepare for anything, nor does it resolve into completion. It exists in a sustained condition, unaffected by presence or absence. Light remains evenly distributed. It does not intensify or fade. No area is emphasized, and no shadow suggests depth or direction. Illumination supports visibility without guiding focus. The air remains consistent. There is no motion that can be followed. No shift in temperature or pressure draws awareness. The environment holds equilibrium without effort. Surfaces remain uniform. They do not reveal detail through prolonged observation. Nothing becomes more distinct over time. The room offers no variation that would invite inspection. Sound continues as a steady presence. It does not form patterns or rhythms. It does not rise, fall, or resolve. It remains integrated within the space, constant and unassertive. The systems continue without interruption. There is no indication of internal processes completing or beginning. Everything operates in a state of quiet continuity. The room does not respond to awareness. It does not change as attention rests within it. There is no feedback loop between observer and environment. The space maintains itself independently. Time does not move forward in a perceptible way. There are no markers of duration or sequence. Moments do not accumulate or separate. The environment remains suspended in a continuous state. The control room does not imply direction. It does not lead anywhere, nor does it suggest return. It exists as a stable enclosure without orientation. Awareness can remain without effort. There is nothing to anticipate or recall. No part of the space demands recognition. The environment remains constant, complete, and undisturbed. The longer the room is perceived, the less it distinguishes itself. It does not reveal new qualities over time. It remains consistent, maintaining its presence without asserting meaning. There is no transition underway. No shift toward resolution. The control room persists exactly as it is, unchanged and uninterrupted. The maintained condition remains evenly distributed. It does not intensify through continued presence. Nothing within the room gathers emphasis. Nothing recedes into absence. The environment holds its balance without adjustment, allowing perception to remain without pressure or direction. The systems continue their operation without signaling change. There is no rise or fall that would suggest cycles. No pattern becomes distinct. Indicators remain steady, not communicating readiness, not implying completion. The room remains supported in the same manner, without alteration that can be detected. Light continues without fluctuation. It does not dim or brighten. It does not introduce contrast that would suggest depth. Illumination remains uniform across surfaces, keeping the environment legible without drawing attention toward any area. Shadows do not shift. No reflection becomes prominent. Nothing within the visual field demands focus. Sound persists as a continuous layer. It does not form rhythm. It does not resolve into identifiable motion. There is no cycle to follow, no pulse to anticipate. Its steadiness becomes indistinct, present enough to confirm operation and stable enough to remain unnoticed. Nothing interrupts it. Nothing replaces it. The air remains regulated without producing sensation. It does not form a current that can be tracked. Temperature does not shift. There is no change in pressure or movement that would draw awareness. The atmosphere maintains equilibrium, supporting the room without becoming a feature of experience. Time remains without markers. The room does not separate moments into stages. Earlier and later do not present clear boundaries. Duration does not accumulate meaning. The environment remains evenly sustained, allowing time to become diffuse, unmeasured, and unannounced. The space does not organize itself into areas of importance. There is no foreground and no background. No surface becomes more prominent through observation. The room does not reward attention and does not punish drift. Its condition remains consistent regardless of how awareness relates to it. The maintained systems do not reveal processes completing or beginning. Nothing suggests transition. No threshold is approached. The room does not move toward resolution. It remains in operation without announcing purpose, maintaining continuity without forming events. Surfaces remain uniform in tone and texture. Edges do not sharpen. Details do not emerge. Nothing becomes clearer over time. The room does not offer variation that would invite inspection or comparison. It remains consistent, stable, and unchanged. Awareness does not need to confirm stability. There is no signal that requires checking. The environment holds its condition without reference to observation. It continues whether it is noticed closely or allowed to recede into background awareness. As perception remains within the room, orientation becomes unnecessary. There is no direction to follow. No destination is implied. The space exists as a maintained enclosure rather than a passage, sustaining itself without invitation or resistance. The absence of change does not register as stillness. It registers as continuation. The environment remains operational without variation that can be measured. Nothing suggests that something is ending. Nothing suggests that something is beginning. The longer the control room is perceived, the less it asserts itself as an object. It becomes a background condition rather than a subject. Awareness does not need to hold detail or release it. The room remains consistent either way, stable and complete. Within this sustained neutrality, nothing requires completion. There is no conclusion to reach and no transition to anticipate. The control room persists exactly as it is, unchanged and uninterrupted, allowing perception to remain present without effort, without expectation, and without the need to resolve anything. The control room remains unchanged as time continues to pass without registration. There is no moment when the environment signals a shift in state. Nothing within the space suggests progress or regression. The systems continue to operate with the same consistency, unaffected by duration or attention. The air remains evenly balanced. It does not circulate in a way that draws awareness. No current is felt, no temperature difference emerges. The atmosphere exists only to support the space, remaining neutral and unobtrusive. The surfaces within the room do not gather meaning through observation. They remain uniform, without texture drawing attention or variation becoming apparent. No surface becomes a point of focus. Nothing invites inspection or analysis. The room maintains its coherence without highlighting any of its elements. Sound remains constant and unchanging. It does not swell or diminish. It does not introduce rhythm or pattern. The sound exists as a stable presence, neither foreground nor background, simply part of the environment's continuity. The passage of time does not register as movement. There is no sense of approach or departure. The room does not indicate progression or completion. It remains suspended in a continuous state, unaffected by the presence of awareness. Nothing within the environment calls for response. There are no cues, no signals, no transitions to observe. The room does not react to attention, nor does it withdraw when attention fades. It persists in the same configuration, uninterrupted. The systems that maintain the room continue to function without interruption. They do not announce their activity. There is no audible or visual sign of change. Everything remains stable, operating beneath awareness. The control room does not suggest purpose or direction. It does not imply movement or intention. It exists as a sustained condition rather than a place of action. The environment remains self-contained and complete. There is no sense of arrival or departure. The room does not frame itself as a beginning or an end. It simply continues, holding its form without transition or resolution. Awareness does not need to settle or adjust. The space does not demand focus or interpretation. It remains present without effort, allowing perception to remain still. The longer the room persists, the less it distinguishes itself from awareness. The boundary between observer and environment softens. The room becomes a constant backdrop, stable and unchanging. There is no final moment. There is no cue that signals conclusion. The control room continues as it always has, maintaining its state without interruption, without expectation, and without end. The environment does not indicate completion or transition. There is no signal that anything is about to change. The control room remains in its sustained state, unaffected by duration or awareness. It does not acknowledge time passing, nor does it respond to continued presence. Nothing within the space suggests conclusion. There is no softening, no shift toward stillness, no sense of arrival. The room remains exactly as it has been, neither opening nor closing itself to perception. The systems continue their operation without recognition. They do not slow, and they do not progress. They maintain equilibrium without deviation, sustaining the environment without alteration. The space holds itself without effort. It does not lean toward stillness or motion. It does not anticipate change or react to it. It remains constant, stable, and undisturbed. The control room persists as a continuous state. Nothing within it resolves or concludes. There is no end point suggested, no threshold approached. It remains present, unchanged, allowing awareness to remain without direction or expectation. Block 5, Control Room, Final Segment. The control room remains present without announcing continuation or closure. It does not indicate that anything has reached an end. The environment holds its condition without signaling conclusion or transition. There is no sense of arrival, and no sense of departure. The systems continue to operate without acknowledgement. They do not accelerate or diminish. They do not announce completion or prepare for change. Their function persists quietly, independent of awareness or observation. The space does not react to duration. Time does not leave a mark. Nothing accumulates. Nothing resolves. The environment exists without the need for progression or return. Light remains evenly distributed, unchanged by the passage of moments. It neither softens nor intensifies. It does not signal rest or renewal. It maintains visibility without encouraging focus. Sound continues without contour. It does not form rhythm or pattern. It does not imply motion or stillness. It exists as a constant layer, neither foreground nor background. The air maintains equilibrium. There is no movement to register, no fluctuation to follow. The space does not breathe or pause. It simply remains. There is no sense of time passing forward. There is no indication of repetition or cycle. The control room does not present an end or a beginning. It exists as an ongoing state, complete in itself. Awareness does not need to settle or adjust. There is no point of focus to hold. No element requires attention or release. The environment does not respond to observation or disengagement. The room remains as it is. Unaltered. Uninterrupted. It does not acknowledge being observed. It does not acknowledge duration. The absence of change does not become silence. It becomes continuity. The space remains present, stable, and self-contained. Nothing concludes. Nothing begins. The control room continues without transition, without resolution, and without end. The control room does not acknowledge the passage of time. It does not respond to duration or repetition. Nothing within the space signals that anything has changed or should change. The environment maintains its condition without awareness of continuity. The systems continue their operation without variance. They do not adjust, and they do not indicate strain or renewal. Their presence remains consistent, unmarked by progression or decay. They exist in a state of quiet function, unaltered by observation. The air remains balanced and undisturbed. There is no movement that invites attention. No sensation forms that would suggest motion or rest. The atmosphere continues to support the space without introducing experience. Light persists without transformation. It neither dims nor brightens. It does not signal conclusion or transition. It simply remains, allowing the environment to stay visible without emphasis. The room does not react to time passing. There is no accumulation of meaning or depletion of presence. Nothing resolves, and nothing emerges. The environment remains exactly as it is, without development or decline. Awareness does not need to anchor itself. There is no point of reference to hold on to. The space does not respond to focus or inattention. It continues regardless, steady and unchanged. The control room does not imply an ending. It does not lead toward silence or resolution. It persists in its condition, uninterrupted and complete. There is no moment of closure. No signal of departure. No indication that anything has finished or will begin again. The space remains present, continuous, and undisturbed.